a lot of times when people attend to talk like this, their first, sorry, just Karen, some reason there's volume coming out here still. Maybe through. Yeah, yeah, definitely sound. Maybe if you move it toward the back, it'll be a little easier. Thanks. So a lot of times people join these talks and they want strategies like 6 months ago, and they want the tips on like how to get their kids to comply. This might be a little frustrating in that regard. This is a presentation that will kind of go with the idea that slow is fast in terms of managing screens and screen time. But we will get to some really practical tips and strategies, things that are really important and helpful. But a lot of this, the approach in dealing with screens in a digital age, is going to be about building a relationship. So what we're going to talk about today, the first part is just the communication and alliance building. We're going to really try to focus on the relationship before setting boundaries, and I'll explain why that's so important. We're going to try to spend some time understanding the impact of the screens, so the psychological effects, the neurochemical effects of screen time on developing minds. I'm also going to take you through a few strategic conversations. By that, I mean, I'll actually give you a script. I'll give you words to say. You can take screenshots. The presentation, I'll send it out to you. I don't know if there's a way to send it out without my notes, but even in the notes, you'll see exact quotes that you can try to say, make it really direct. And you can adapt those, of course. And then we're going to learn about just basic principles of reinforcement. So when you do find something that works and how to reinforce that. And one of the big ideas, 2 or 3 big ideas today, but one of them I want to just start with, it's actually okay to reinforce things that are less bad in a teen. So if they're on screen 6 hours a day and you see them on screens 3 hours a day, it's actually okay to say, like, pretty cool to see you on a screen only 3 hours today. And if you can catch them on the sofa for 3 minutes with their phone down, and you can jump in and say, like, hey, great to see you without a phone in your hand, that's actually okay. It's not sarcastic to your kid. And these principles of reinforcement will come in handy. The alliance building piece that we're going to talk about, I really need to emphasize that if we consider like 12 weeks of alliance building, like 3 months of alliance building, before you start setting boundaries and reinforcing new behaviors, you're going to be much more effective in the long run. And this is really about a long run approach. There are some short and fast strategies we'll get to, for sure. But what most parents have found is that when they've tried those short and fast strategies, from like, oh, I bought a timer on the computer, or I put a limit on the router, then what they find is a few weeks later, like, my child did a screen recording on my phone and got my password, and they just circumvented it, or they went to a different website and they figured it out. And so it becomes this sort of game of cat and mouse. We're going to really try to avoid those cat and mouse games. We're going to try to get an alliance. And then the other thing that happens is kids go to different homes. They go to different places. And sometimes different parents have different rules. Grandma has different rules, or when the parents aren't home. And so what we're trying to do is really come up with an approach that helps your child regulate their own screen time as well. I think one of the things I've learned in working with parents is that parents feel really helpless in this area. A lot of parents parented the way that they were parented. They just do, like, well, this is what my mom did, this is what my dad did, so this is what I do. But those aren't really relevant skills in a modern age when we're dealing with screens. We're not dealing with something that we've ever really dealt with before. This is a brand new thing. So in a lot of ways, people are figuring this out really for the first time. Your parents previously had to figure out how to keep you out of, like, taking the car or something like that, which isn't a thing in Hong Kong. But hiding screens and stealing phones is a really big issue. One of the ways that boundary setting takes place in a modern era is that kids have completely different environments. They have schools, they have technology, that they need the technology in schools. So parents don't have the luxury of saying, like, give me your phone, give me your computer, because kids need that. And then parents get really frustrated. They get afraid, they feel helpless, they feel powerless. And when anybody feels helpless and powerless, they react. And so parent emotions are a big part of this story too. Parents need to learn new skill sets to manage their own emotions about challenges that they can't really face. One of the questions that came up on our talk, on our handouts, what would you say, the flyer that went out? I can English very good today. Is parents were concerned about addiction. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit, and it has to do with the interventions that we use too. So there's a whole school of thought on addiction that has to do with, and we'll talk about this a little more and further on in the talk as well. There's some debate over, is it addictive? Because there's no like neurochemical in your body that like needs a screen. Of course, we know that, and it's not like physically addictive. But the way that we look at addiction is we look at impairment and insight. So we look at what effect is the device, substance, behavior having in your day-to-day life. If the device is your child's using it for 30 minutes, but you try to take it and they lose their minds and they throw their phone out the window and they break the door, that's a huge level of impairment. We would call that probably a problem, like an addictive type problem. But some kids can actually manage it. Some kids can like go all week, not touch their device, and then they have a rainy day on a Saturday and they can game for 6 hours and they're exhausted and then they're like, I'm fine. I don't need it. So what we do, we need to think of the stage and not their age. And stage refers to insight. Does the child see problems with their screen use? And so many of I would say the teenagers that I've met with, when parents come in and say they've got this huge issue with their screens, they're up until 6 in the morning, like it's the night before a test and they were gaming all night. And then we close the door and I get to talk to the teenager and I take a real like non-judgmental stance, like, hey, what was going on? Like, good game, like how was it? They don't see a problem with it at all. In fact, it's their parents' problem. They're fine on an hour of sleep. It helps them relax. Like sometimes they'll say, I think it's out of control, but I'll actually ask them, do you think it's out of control? And very often they'll say, I don't think it is. You know, these are the guys that actually most people would agree are having a problem. So developing insight is a real key to making any changes at all. We'll talk about changes, just any behavioral change. If the person doesn't see it as a problem and only you see it as a problem, that's the first problem to address. They need to see it as a problem. So you might be asking, well, how do I develop insight? And there's some questions here that you could use, but it's, you know, what happened in school today when I set some limits on your screen use? Yesterday you forgot to put it away and I took it. How do you feel about that? Or maybe they decided to put some limits and you say something like, I see that you made some changes. It was pretty positive for you. You know, not like, see, I told you were wrong. Like, let's say they decided to not game the night before a test and they did well on a test. It's really tempting for a parent to say like, see, told you so. But then the kid doesn't have any insight. But if they say like, oh, you made some different changes, what impact was that? They can develop some insight. Research is pretty clear when it comes to tech use, and there's not a ton of research on it. Like there's research on different impacts of technology, but in terms of like setting boundaries and like parenting this is relatively new. But one of the places where it is pretty clear, and that comes from like research on just any addiction substances, the greater a child's insight into the problem, the less strict a parent needs to be, and then the more involved the child can be in the solution. So this is why we start with building an alliance. If you see that there's a problem and you're pressuring your child into complying, then they're going to pick it up as soon as you turn around. And then you end up with this problem where kids are not, they're not actually cooperating. They're just complying when you're in front of them. These are the guys that are in school and they are gaming in class. They're watching YouTube while the teacher's talking and they've got different windows open. And if they open their browser, there's like 65 tabs and 43 of them are different little online games. And, you know, kids can look pretty sophisticated and get away with it, look like they're typing notes, but this is a real, like, the game that we're trying to not play with kids anymore. We're trying to build an alliance to help them understand like the impacts that they're having and how they can set their own boundaries. So getting your child on your side is so much important because even different teachers will have different rules. Sometimes teachers will say like, okay, well, when you're done, you can go on your computer and just game. Terrible strategies, because then kids end up finishing the test early so they can do that. But what we're trying to do is help kids become aware of like why they're using screens and when they're using screens and what the purpose of those screens are for. And that's where we're going to start in our talk. So helping you understand why kids use screens too. So there's the neuroscience side of it. The more they play, the more they need to play. This whole idea of dopamine and social media apps, dopamine is not necessarily a reward, like a feel-good thing. It's more of a sense of like mild frustration. So there's a lot of dopamine in pressing a lever and waiting on something to happen. So when kids are gaming and they're anticipating something great, you tell them we're going to go get ice cream, dopamine goes up, but it's not because of the ice cream. It actually goes down when they get the ice cream. And if the ice cream store is closed, they get really frustrated. It's like even below where they started with the baseline. Games are all about creating a sense of frustration. And when your kids can understand that they actually prefer the frustration, not the reward, you can transfer that to like other mildly frustrating tasks, but we'll get into that. Another big impact that screens have is that when you're on a screen, this is true of you and of children, you're not thinking about yourself. You're thinking about what's on the screen. And that means that you're not thinking about any of the negative emotion that you're experiencing. You're not really feeling anything. And fMRI scans, where these scans where kids' brains are conveniently, all the blood flow in their brains are scanned. When kids are on screens, show that the part of their brains that self-referential thinking, it almost goes quiet. That doesn't mean that negative emotion goes away. It just means it kind of goes into like under the rug until kids end up later on when they have a moment of boredom, it all starts to come up again. One of the things that we hear with kids with ADHD is they just have this intoleration of, is that a word? That might not be a word. I'm stumbling with English today. They're just really intolerant of boredom. And they'll say like all the time about how much they hate being bored and they can't, being bored is such a bad thing. And really what happens is boredom is like the first domino that falls. If they get bored, that means all the negative emotion that's been dormant is going to start to come up. All the things they haven't been dealing with are going to start to come up. The experience is like when you're laying in bed, you've had a pretty busy day and you crash into bed, then all of a sudden your head is just like a theater of a horror show and you can't fall asleep. So what happens with kids is the more that they avoid, it's not like they're processing anything. It's the more that they need to avoid. That means they end up having more negative emotion more often and more intensely, but then they'll have periods of like no emotion. We're on, I think you're, sorry, there we go. There we go. Thanks, Karen. The other thing about the brain's, the frontal lobe impact, so executive functioning skills are outsourced in games. Meaning, if your child has to write an essay, they've got a plan, they've got to think of an idea, they've got to know when to edit, they've got to know when to stop, they got to know how much is too much. Games do all of that for them. Games say, here's the next level, here's how you get to the next level. If you lose, here's how you start over, here's how you power up. All the planning is outsourced. So there's like an atrophy of these planning and executive functioning systems. It's not that your kids don't have them, it's just they're not really necessary when they're gaming. The gaming has done all of that for them. So there's this over time, it's not that gaming causes these problems, it's just that the skills never develop like they're needed to develop. You can imagine when kids needed to come up with ways to even sneak out of the house, there was like big elaborate plans that went into place. They don't do that now. They find ways to like just stay up all night and game, but then the gaming kind of takes over in the executive functioning. And so the less I practice regulating my emotions, the more safe screens feel. And so what you end up with is when the more kids play, the more they need to play. And the more they avoid their emotions, the worse they feel. And the less they practice regulating, the safer screens feel. And that's how you end up with this component where like, screens can be, when you're dealing with a screen, you're not just dealing with a device anymore. You're actually dealing with like a kid's emotion regulation system. You're dealing with their coping skills. And you're really hanging on to something that's like a life raft for them. So what we find is that kids that have a lot of screen time have a really tough time regulating emotions. They blame, they're frustrated, they're angry, they have low self-esteem. They deny this is not a problem. Everybody does this. They may not actually say that they feel lonely. They'll probably say like, I feel fine. I have lots of friends. But they'll say things like they're isolated, or they'll know that people aren't really involved. There's no real connection. And look, here's the bottom line when it comes to connection. Oxytocin, the sort of bonding and friendship and like love hormone, we call it, but that we get from just good friends too. There's only two ways you get that, and that's through physical touch or eye contact. And then even physical touch, you kind of have to like physical touch. So if you're, averse to that, but it only comes from real, genuine interactions. It doesn't come from Zoom. Unfortunately, it doesn't come from screens, chatting or texting. It really comes from like somebody putting their hand on your shoulder and looking at you. And kids just aren't getting that when they're on screens. So they can say, oh, I don't feel lonely, but that's the byproduct of not having many feelings at all. It's not because they're not feeling lonely. They're just not really having a lot of feelings. The word for that is alexithymia. It's at the top. And as screen use and gaming increase, children lose the ability to start to sense their emotions. And what we find now, what I see a lot in a clinical setting when kids come in for therapy is they'll say, I either feel good or not good, or I feel bad or not bad, but I don't really have a lot of feelings. These guys very often won't even like a compliment. So you'll give them a compliment like, hey, good job. Heard you did well on your math test. And they're like shy and they hate it. Like, no, I didn't. Everybody did. Like, they get real averse. They like push away birthday cakes. They have like they just don't even want feelings at all. Like any sort of feeling, positive or negative. It's like, it's off limits. Parents are often confused. They're like, I was just being nice to him. I bought him a gift. I told him a compliment. He's like throwing a tantrum now. This is really the side effect of not having a lot of contact with emotions. So what I'm trying to make the case is that screens are not just about games or texting anymore. This is how screens have evolved since, I think I got my first phone in 99, and it was the little Nokia with saved up to 99 contacts, and it played Snake. That was about it. But my psychological needs were not being satisfied by my phone. So I could really kind of care less about my phone. But here's what happens now with screens. So everybody has, to some degree, a need for like an achievement or a challenge. So a sense of accomplishment and success. And the thing about our lives in general is they're not designed to win. There's a lot of things, projects that we as adults have taken on in our lives that just went nowhere. Relationships that we invested so much time in that just burnt out, moves that we did, or jobs that we applied for, or just things that we've worked on, books that we've started, or things like that just failed, just absolutely failed. Games are designed to win. You can lose a game 300 times in a row, and 301 you'll definitely win. Kids will get better at games. So kids' needs for achievement and kids' needs for a challenge are definitely met by gaming. And what I need to consider in the context of like a high achieving school, or which is pretty much any school in Hong Kong, just think for a minute, how much of our kids' lives are surrounded by rewards and reinforcements for achieving a high grade, a trophy, being affiliated with like a good tutoring group or a college. Like, it's all that they hear about their whole lives is it matters to achieve, it matters to achieve, it matters to achieve. So they get on a game and they can achieve. That's a pretty good feeling. Games provide a sense of community. SM is a social media. They kind of come with friendships included. So if you're kind of a lonely, awkward teen and you feel like nobody in the world understands you, which is what it means to be a teen, you kind of have a place where you belong. You have a place where you're good at something and you're kind of a part of a community. So if you walk into a lunch table and you're a 12-year-old boy and you kind of know the other people there play the same game as you can talk about Valorant or whatever Call of Duty game you play, or Minecraft, and like other people, you have something to talk about. But that's even if you make it to the table. But there's a sense of community. Last year, there was a survey in America, which you can pick on America. As an American, I can pick on America, about the #1 desired career. It was a YouTuber or a gamer, or a TikTok star. So kids have a sense of identity. They become Insta famous. They want to become YouTubers. They become gamers. They also get to be prettier. There's filters on phones that are automatic. Zoom adds, I think Zoom turns it up. I don't know how it was measured, so I don't even quote it, but Zoom adds a filter, so I'm definitely less handsome in person, if you can imagine that. Um, Kids get to be more powerful. They get to be funnier, so they get to think about their replies. Um, they also, in school, if you're getting teased, you kind of got to get teased. You can't just block the person. You can't just like look at the person and like push a button and make them shut up. But you can on a phone or a game. You can kick them out of your game. You can block them on the game, and you never have to see them again. So kids get to feel safer. They have a lot of control over the interactions or anyone who's awkward to them. And if they're blocked, if someone says, you're the weird one, I'm blocking you, they can just move on. So if I get teased in school, I can't just move on and I can't really block the person, but I can on a game. So games are safe. Like my needs for safety are met when I'm on a phone or on a game. The big takeaway is that if you're going to talk about setting boundaries with your child and you're not going to really understand what needs are being met by their games, you're setting yourself up for a big fight and a lot of subversion. So the goal here is really to help a kid build a life that's worth living, not trying to learn how to enforce the limits or take the screens away. If you can help your child get their needs met in other ways, you won't have to have a conversation about the screens. That's not something that I say lightly. That's something that I've worked on with hundreds of kids who've come in and with excessive gaming habits and have moved. We find ways, and we'll do that in the next coming slides. We find ways to get their needs met in other situations in their life. Where can we find challenging aspects of their life? Can we sign them up for a rock climbing gym? Can we get them involved in trail running? Something that's like high energy. Can we join a basketball team after school? And parents will say, oh, they do. Yeah, they have all these activities, but they don't really like it. There's other needs that need to be met. And so parents, I guess, and educators, some people here are educators, what we're trying to do is find out for the first few months, and I know people are kind of like, oh, I don't want this to be 3 months. I want to figure it out this weekend. We really need to try to figure out what games are being met. And so part of the conversation with kids is going to be around like, what do games give you? Like what's great about games for you? So I told you, just mentioned more about addictions. There's a debate on tech addiction. It's all about functional impairment. So if it causes a problem, it needs to be addressed. That's really where we can stop. Regardless of the addiction status, we really want to focus on building a healthy relationship with technology. That's the whole takeaway here. For kids, addictions are solutions. They're not problems. Actually, for anyone, for adults that say that they drink too much, and if we ask them about it, they'll say it's a solution. My life is crap. My work is really stressful. My relationships are really stressful. Of course, I'm going to have a drink, and a lot of them. Like the drinks are a solution. So what we try to do is if we can make life a little bit better so they don't need that solution, they can come up with better solutions. So managing screen time for kids, it's all about responsibility. And I think one of the things that parents say often is like, how can I get them to take more responsibility? And I'm actually going to say that we want them to take less responsibility. By that, I mean, we want parents to share some of the responsibility here. Giving them more information is not going to help. That's really not going to lead to behavior change. That's like when cigarettes started putting like cancer warnings on the side of cigarette packets, like literally made no difference at all. What parents need to, I guess what I want to take away from this is that when parents share the responsibility, the child has the opportunity to ask the parent for help. So when parents start saying things like, screens are bad, they're addictive, they're hurting your brain, you can't regulate emotions, like the same thing that happened when cigarette companies put out warnings is happening with kids. People come up with all the reasons like, it won't happen to me. That's for somebody else. Parents can help prepare their kid for making changes by understanding how the consequences might affect them, and then aligning new behaviors with their goals. I guess what I'm trying to say here, and what the information on the slide is trying to say, is that when you as a parent go in and trying to make a case about something being wrong, The only thing that really happens in a teenage brain is they come up with all the reasons that you're wrong, and they start, even if they didn't have the reasons before, they'll create new reasons to prove that they're right. It's just not really going to be a useful strategy for you. We're going to skip 2 slides. I'm saying that for Karen. So let's talk about building the alliance, and we're doing this mostly around games. The first thing that we want to do with, if you want to change your child's relationship with gaming, and I'm saying gaming a lot, but by the way, I also mean social media, just to be clear, I'm just using just a single word. If they're on TikTok too much or Instagram way too much, and they're telling you all the things, like it's how we chat, you just see them on their phone all the time, even if it's not gaming, like I'm talking about the same thing. The first thing we need to do is figure out, how can we figure out what needs are being fulfilled by screens? There's a lot of modeling that goes on in this. And so here's some sentences you might actually say. I'm trying to figure out that I'm going to be a parent right now, having a conversation with a kid. And I might say something like, I'm trying to figure out what the right amount of screen time is for you. I just really want to understand a little bit more about like what you find really interesting and necessary about your screens. I'm not going to take them away. I'm not like, but maybe if you're gaming, I wonder if like I could like watch you game sometimes. Or if like after you game, like could I ask you a bunch of questions about the games? And you can talk about how to talk. This needs to be separate from incidents of, they didn't put their gaming away at 9 o'clock, and then you go and you say like, hey, I told you and we were going to talk about this and you said you were fine and you agreed and now look at you. This isn't going to be that. It's just one slide ahead. That's all. Just one more. There we go. That's it. That's it. Um, reflective listening is going to be part of this. The idea that you're trying to work with is trying to figure out what the kid really cares about. So I put on here, go to values, number 5. So tell me a little bit more about what you enjoy about social media. Tell me a little bit more about what you enjoy about gaming. Your job for the first month at the very least is to really just listen and learn. If they keep talking about how cool it is and how exciting it is, then you know that they're meeting their needs for achievement and for challenge. And then as a parent, you can start looking for ways to meet those needs in other places. If they're like, all my friends are on here, then you know that their needs for safety and community are on there. If they say like, oh, I really want to be a YouTuber, and they've got a little channel going and maybe you find out about it along the way, which a lot of kids do, or they want to, they have a couple of YouTubers that they follow and they really want to be famous on Instagram. You need to know that. Like, you need to know that this is a part of like what they see as an identity. This is the whole first month. Really setting aside an entire month where you're not putting new limits in, do what you're currently doing. And really the first month though, you're trying to talk about understanding. That's all it is. So they say like games are so much more fun, school's so much boring. You're not like, no, it's not. Your job is like, oh, what do you like about it? What's fun about it? It's not going to be obvious to them what's even fun about it. They're just going to use words that they have said to get you away in the past. So these are going to be deeper conversations. You need to be modeling as much as you can that it's safe to talk to you about games. If they don't want to talk to you about games because they think there's big consequences coming, you're going to have a kid continue to sneak games, hide phones, fight with you, all that sort of stuff. So you're trying to model and create I guess, a situation in your house where you're like, we can talk about this and it's okay to talk about this. Okay. So when you get to the point where you want to share your perspective, so toward the end of the month, this is where you can, basically thank your child for what you've learned. Hey, for the past month, I've been sitting with you and watching you game, and like we've been talking about your phone, and you've showed me some funny memes, and like you keep sending me all these funny videos, and like I think it's so cool you're doing all that. Like I love that we can talk about this now. It's so useful. Here's what I've learned about you. I've learned you love this like edgy adventure stuff. Like this is really where you feel the most alive, or you really want to be a YouTuber. Like you've got ideas for a channel and you'd love to get that silver trophy in your room. But now I understand why you keep asking me for a microphone and LED lights and all this stuff. Or you want to be a streamer. You know, like the things that you've learned about it. Um, you ask them like, do you disagree? Like, am I wrong on this? Like, what am I missing? And then we're going to start aligning your concerns with their concerns. So it seems like your friends and family are really important to you. I want you to know I think your friends are really important too. We both want you to have fun. And then I told you earlier I'd go to two big ideas. This is the second big idea. The second big one is dump it in their lap. And I'll say that phrase a couple more times as we go on. Laying out what really matters to you as a parent, and then letting them find a solution at first. So look, you know, what really matters to me as a parent is you do have some friends. I don't really get the sense that you're feeling very connected though, because most of the time that you have is really just you alone in a room. Help me find a way to make you actually have more friends. Like help me find a way to make it happen so you spend more time in person with your friends. Like, like what can we do about that? It doesn't need to be your solution. Like if if I can be more direct, you're not telling them what to do. They're telling you possible ideas, but you're telling them, you're kind of giving a framework to work with. You're telling them the values of why that's important. And be really transparent. Lying to your kids is only going to break the trust. So being really clear about here's what my goals are. My goals are that you have fun and hang out with your friends. It's also that we can put some limits on your screen time, but I want to be sure those limits are like reasonable to you too. But we're not going to try to trick your kids into agreeing. The idea is like, here's what I think is important. How can we make that happen? Now, when you have this conversation, I might be making it sound like it's going to be an easy one to have. When you start talking about boundaries around phone use or screen use, you're going to get defensiveness. And when you get defensiveness in a kid, that's going to bring up your own emotions as a parent. You're going to want to get this right. You're going to think, I've invested a month putting up with your stupid jokes. If I get one more like fart joke on my phone, I'm just going to throw my phone out the window. I don't want to do this. This is all in the back of your mind, by the way. You don't say it out loud. But you're going to have to really work on managing your own emotions in this moment. And so when you're in this position, the three C's really are what we're trying to aim for. The cool, calm, collected parent is going to be the most successful parent. There's a reason for this too. And I want to go back to the very beginning where we said like kids use devices to manage negative emotions. When they feel afraid or stressed, they dive into a phone, into a screen. So what's going to happen if they have a stressed parent in front of them? They're going to want to dive into a screen. And the three common parent emotions, fear, frustration, and guilt. Parents feel afraid, like my kid's just never going to put this down. I can't make it happen. And then they feel really guilty. This is my fault. I shouldn't have bought him a phone at 9 years old. But, you know, every time that we were in the restaurant, he just started yelling. There we go. I just gave him a phone, and now here's the problem I'm putting up with. You know, parents do these tricks in their mind where they blame themselves constantly for what they're going through. It's just not the case. Screens are a big culprit in this. This is not a pass to be angry and rageful. Just it's a pass to be authentic. So if you are frustrated, it's actually okay to say like, it's so frustrating for me when I have to take your phone. I hate taking your phone. It makes me feel like a real jerk. It ruins our relationship. Like it's okay to be authentic. But it's not a pass to be like really aggressive. I hope that's obvious. Um, when I was explaining how screens are a place for safety, and often kids will need that safety. As a parent, the reason I'm saying controlling your emotions is I'm trying to persuade you that you can become that safe harbor. So if you can become the place where kids can come in and drop off their negative emotions, that doesn't mean they're abusive toward you. It doesn't mean that they're just angry at you all the time. But it does mean if they've had a pretty crappy day, that they can come home and have a crappy day. They don't need to come home and bury themselves in a phone. And I guess I want to frame this like one of the sentences that I hear so often that gets just so misunderstood by kids is parents will say, I just want them to be happy. And what a kid hears is, I'm not allowed to be anything but happy. So it's not safe. It's not safe to be angry. It's not safe to be frustrated. It's not safe to be upset. It's not safe to be bored or annoyed. As a parent, you're trying to create a space where your kids can have that safe space so they don't need the phone to regulate their emotions first. I know in my own household, it was like, yeah, just crying wasn't allowed. It was just like, go wash your face and come back when you're ready, that sort of stuff. Like, I'll give you a reason to cry. Like those are the sorts of situations that put kids in a place where they have no other choice but to bury emotions. Um, I put the word halt on here at the end, 4 times to not talk to your kid about something stressful in general, including screens, and 4 times for your kid to not talk about you. If they're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, just take a step back. It's not the right time. You can always have the conversation later. Have some food, have a nap, go for a walk, clean something in your house, just relax, have the conversation later. You're really trying to be in a place where you're setting the right limits. You know, like if your child's being harassed and you take away their phone, um, they're going to be in a fight or flight state, and they're not going to talk to you about the harassment because they're afraid. So this is so important that you're able to just be that cool, calm, collected parent that you're like, so I understand your phone is like really the safest place for you. And you can have that conversation. Um, we'll get to the part where we're setting boundaries. This is where parents start to get really excited about this. This is where parents said like, okay, I'm ready now. I'm going to skip the whole conversation because I know my kid. Don't skip that conversation. I'm telling you, you need a month at least, like really set aside the month. But if we're going to get into the boundaries part, which we'll do now, um, there's, we'll start at the most obvious. We're going to start with the smallest hill that you'd be willing to die on. And I mean that this might be really hard to set a boundary with your child. So we're going to pick the smallest one that you're willing to reinforce and you're willing to really stand by. To set the really big boundaries about turning your laptop in every single night at exactly 9 o'clock, that might not be the one to do. You can decide what's small enough for you that's actually worth it. But there needs to already be a pattern of like a month of understanding, communicating, some alternatives. And then you're going to incentivize them to listen to you. You're going to give them a sense of control. So I put an example of something you might say on here. So you can manage your own time until 7 p.m. and the homework needs to be done. I'll spend about 25 minutes or 15 minutes checking at around 7 p.m. And if I'm not satisfied, there's not going to be any more screens. Like we're trying to turn this over to the kids somewhat. So they want a game and they want to do their homework. And you say, yeah, I'm not going to sit there and monitor your screen time until 7 p.m. if you're gaming online or not, but I am going to check your homework at 7 p.m. If you've been gaming the whole time and your homework's not done, like if I check it and it's not done to my satisfaction, and you're not going to be a mean parent here with an alternative agenda, you're really going to try to be understanding. If your homework's not done, after I check it, and then then there's not screens tomorrow. That's just the way it's going to be. But they have the sense of control in their court. And then in that 15 minutes that you're sitting with them and you're checking their work, you can also have conversations about the screens. And if they actually did it, oh my God, look, you manage your screen time. That's awesome. I wish you would have done a little bit more of this, a little bit less of that. But here's some qualities of boundaries when we talk about screen time boundaries. Parents found this really effective, have found this really effective. We call it the 25% rule. So pick your first goal and then cut it in half and then do that again. So that's what I mean by starting really small. So if your first goal is like reduce their screen time by 2 hours a day, cut that in half and then cut that in half again. And we're going to start with just 30 minutes a day. The boundary has to be enforceable. So do you have the bandwidth to check that your child is actually complying with this boundary? So if you set a boundary about screen time and you're not home 3 nights a week because of like work commitments or personal commitments, this isn't a boundary for you to set, at least not at this stage. This needs to be something that you can actually have the bandwidth in your life to actually reinforce. And then the other part of it is acceptable. Your child needs to agree that this is an acceptable limit. And they may say no limits is what they want. But then that's when I'm going to go back to that second big idea today of dumping it in their lap. As your parent, I kind of need to manage your screen time somewhat. So you can tell me how to do that. Like, what do you think would be reasonable? Obviously, unlimited screen time is not really working out for us. And the more positivity you can have around boundaries, the easier it is going to be to set new ones later. You're kind of setting up a conversation for later on. Sometimes when parents talk about boundaries, or if you were to go watch or read about like how to set boundaries, one thing that you'll hear quite often is that the best boundaries are the ones that don't require your child to do anything. You can set them regardless of your child's cooperation. This isn't all that different, although we are asking them to actually do something. But what we're trying to do is make the case where they can enforce the boundary for you. So if we give them some choice and some say in it, and it's small enough, and you can enforce it, it really is something that's totally in your control. But if you make it too big, you're setting yourself up for more arguments later. So how do we get the child involved? We start off with like, so what's our goal here? And again, it's our goal. Our goal is that you have fun. Our goal is that you have friends. Our goal is that you get to do well in school and play games. Like we both have the same goal. I'm not trying to take your phone away and you're the only weird kid without a phone. We're going to have a really upfront conversation about not doing it. But if it turns out you can't handle it, then you can't handle it. And we might need to talk about alternatives. But again, we're going to dump it in their lap. So before I tell you, like, if you can't handle it, I'm taking away your phone, maybe that's not a good solution, but maybe it is. Maybe you would agree with that. So if you don't follow this boundary, what do you think should happen? How do we monitor this? That's the other big part of this. So then, you're not the one saying like, I'm going to check every 15 minutes or every Sunday and check your screen time. And if it's 2 minutes over, you might need to make it 2 minutes over, but that would be their suggestion. So you're asking them, how do we monitor this? How do we check on this? If you don't do this, what happens? Often in my own experience, kids come up with great solutions. They don't want to follow through on the solutions later, but they do have really good ideas. But again, if you're collaborating with your child on this, you'll probably have a much better chance than if you sit down and say, if you don't do this, I'm taking it, and here's how I'm going to monitor it. This is a collaborative conversation. The consequences can be tailored so they can be proportional to different levels of violation. So if your child goes over their screen time for 10 minutes, that doesn't need to be Armageddon in the house. But if they steal their, I had one kid who's the parents took his phone away and then he started taking their phone and hiding it. And that was a big deal. I thought he was pretty clever for doing it. I'd never tell him that, but that would be a bigger consequence. That'd be a totally different setting. Some parents, the consequences have been like, I'm just going to buy you 100 minutes a week on a SIM card. If you meet all your goals, you can have 200 minutes the next week. But if not, I'm not buying you another 100 minutes for your SIM card. So it's Wi-Fi only, wherever you can find it. I'm not a big proponent of sticker systems or rewards, but I do think that it's important when you're creating this, if you want to say like, here's our target for this week. If you want to kind of set up something as a reward for that, I'm open to it. But this is really all about the process of like them monitoring their screen time. I also want to emphasize structuring the discussions is really important. So we're not going to really ambush kids with like, now's the time to talk about this. It's going to be like, hey, just remember Thursday at 5 when you get home, you don't have basketball that day. So we're going to talk about your screens. And you tell them that on Monday. And on Tuesday, you're like, hey, don't forget Thursday at 5, we're going to talk about screens. If you want to think about it in advance, you can do that and let me know. Wednesday and then Thursday morning, don't forget tonight when you come home, we're going to talk about your screens. You're going to have a much more cool, calm, and collected self, and then your child's going to be on board too. Sometimes parents say, like, should we write down our agreements and sign it? Signing doesn't increase compliance. It's not necessary, but it is really important, I think, to write down what you guys agree on. So if you and your child agree that you're going to reduce your screen time 30 minutes, or you're only going to use one social media app, or watch 4 YouTube videos max a day, and we'll talk about why maybe that's important. Whatever you do, write it down so that it's super clear. Like, just put it out super clear. So that when you go back to the conversation later, you can say, hey, this is what we agreed on. You were there, but they don't have to sign it. That doesn't make any difference. One of the questions I get a lot, which I think is the wrong question, but it's how many hours of screen time is acceptable? And this is really a gray area because it's not really about hours of screen time. It's about what's happening during the screen time or what happens as a result of screen time. There's all kinds of screen time. There's Schoology screen time, there's homework screen time, there's social media screen time. Also, there's times of use that really matter. So like 3 hours of screen time, but at 2 in the morning is a really bad idea, even if they're like, but you said 3 hours. Also 3 hours all at once, not so great. 3 hours over 6 days, totally fine for most kids. So it's really not about how much screen time, but it's about what happens as a result. This goes back to this idea of, is it an addiction or not an addiction? Some kids, an hour is too much. The other thing I want to point out, though, is somebody who teaches executive functioning skills, like, and I work a lot with like attention spans and ADHD, watching 30, 60-second clips will train your system of attention that's really short attention. But watching one 30-minute show, like when I was a kid, I had to watch Sesame Street or the Carol Burnett show or MASH or like some just stupid, it was so boring, but it was the only thing on TV. There were 4 channels and I had to get up and click it. And I'm not going to get up and click it, so I'm just going to watch whatever's on TV. And so watching one 30-minute show is totally different than watching 31-minute shows. So the question of like, is 30 minutes too much? Yeah, for some kids, 30 minutes is way too much because they just sit there and boom, 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 boom. And they just never really stop. So instead of that conversation about how much is too much, it's really more about like, what are we doing when we're on the screens? I'm going to go back to this big idea again and again. Dump it in their lap. What's a reasonable response to you if this boundary is broken? So if I give you 2 hours of screen time and it's literally 2 hours of scrolling through every YouTube video, click to the next one, click to the next one. Like I know you guys have seen on your own YouTube channels on the side or your own YouTube window on the side, there's all these videos that it suggests, or sometimes on the bottom, there's all these videos that it suggests. If you ever watched a kid, especially with screen issues on YouTube, they get 30 seconds into a video, they scroll, they don't like it, boom, it's on to the next one. Boom, it's on to the next one. They're watching videos for like maybe a minute at the most, which is how the whole idea of YouTube Shorts came about, because that's just what kids were doing. They were switching anyway. As a parent, it's something like, hey, you can stick to this. You can choose 3 videos in the next hour if you want, but if you can't get something you like in the first 3 videos, it's time to put the device away. That's a different conversation than like, but what if I choose the wrong one? Like you can choose the wrong one like twice, but you got to pick one. If that's the boundary that you decide to set, and then you say to them, what's a reasonable response if you break this boundary? Like what's reasonable to you if I see you clicking through like 35 videos and scrolling on Instagram Reels? That's if that's what you decide what you want. I'm not like well, actually I am. I'm totally against Instagram Reels. I don't have an account myself, but I see what it does to kids. Their attention spans are like they can't even follow like a 30-second video. But if you and your child decide together that that's what you want to work on, then you need to ask them like, what's reasonable to you? The goal is that you preserve the relationship as well. So kids need to trust what you're going to say, and that can't happen if you keep changing your mind. You can't keep changing your mind in the moment. And so this is where your parental emotions, your own emotions, cool, calm, and collected comes back into play. Children needs to know. So sometimes parents sometimes parents will ask about consequences, and they'll say like, how do I enforce it? Or, they'll tell me all the reasons that they can't enforce it. So I think that, the general feedback I can give on this in this talk, and we can talk more toward the end. When kids can anticipate the consequences and they have a say in the consequences, compliance goes way up. So you can give them an advance warning about the consequences coming, and they're much more likely to comply. So here's 2 examples of things you might say. Hey, I noticed you're playing a lot of games today. It must mean you're totally ready to get an A on that test. You're not really telling them anything, but you're telling them everything. You're making it really clear what your expectation is. You're making it really clear that you understand, that they understand that an A on the test is part of the deal if they want to keep gaming. Do you want to stop now, or do you want me to come back in 5 minutes? You're making it really clear what the boundary is. If I have to come back in 5 minutes, I might have to take it away. I really don't want to take it away. I'd much rather you choose this. If they start overreacting, you can let them overreact. Remember, if you're doing this, as well as you possibly can, you're in a cool and collected state. You're not fighting with them. But instead of like, no, I'm not overreacting, you agreed to this. It's more like, help me understand why this is so hard for you right now. Like, what's going on? Like, what's making it so hard for you to comply with our agreement? We set this boundary together. How do you think it's unfair to you now? It's so unfair, and it's like, "Oh, actually, we set this together. Why do you think it's unfair now? I don't really encourage jumping into that conversation too much, but I do encourage, like, you can let them have a say. Um, when this is going to go back to when you're reinforcing their behaviors, you want to look for the ones that are going to be more helpful for them over time. So you can do things that are less bad. So if they're making some progress, sometimes parents want to wait until the kid's like totally sticks the landing to be able to reinforce them. That's the wrong approach. So like if you're trying to teach a dog how to sit, obviously the dog doesn't even know the word sit. You don't wait until they finally sit to like give them the treat. You're like, you say the word 1,000 times, they kind of like put their butt toward the ground and you're like, yeah, 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 yeah. And you really get there. Sometimes if you just catch them sitting and you throw a treat and you're like, good, sit. You have to like teach them this boundary over time, but through approximations. And so that's what you're doing with your child as well. Um, I see you're on the phone without your sofa today, or on the sofa without your phone today. That's really cool. It's definitely something you can say to your kid, even if they've been on their phone for 3 hours on the sofa that day. Oh my gosh, you put your phone down. Awesome. Like it really, I'm telling you, it really works. But try it on your own. Um, what we're trying to consider is that when they're upset and they're resisting a boundary, this is all about emotions. If they're on screens a lot already, they don't have a good repertoire of skills to manage their emotions. So instead of like, it's my way or the highway, I'm the parent, I get to decide, it's more like, help me understand what's tough. I see that it's tough. I'm not saying to bend with it. I'm just saying to like help them regulate their own emotions. This is the approach you need to take because you're modeling, oh, I can tell you what's tough. Just roll with it, really. So if they're like, oh, it's no big deal, I don't even care, take my phone. Like, what do you mean by that? Seems like I get you're feeling that way right now. You're emphasizing right now, like your emotions are going to change. Um, I just want you to remember that they're emotionally regulating. They're not just on a game. You just see a kid holding a phone and playing a game. They're regulating their emotions. So the worse that they feel, the more they need that screen. So if you come in hot and make them feel pretty terrible, they're going to need that screen even more. So your fight's going to be even bigger. Some of the big pitfalls to setting boundaries when parents try to set boundaries, especially around screens, they try to enforce and set a boundary at the same time. You can't do that. So it can't be 9 o'clock on a Tuesday and you're like, you know what? Tonight's the night I tell you that 9 o'clock is the time limit. I'm taking it. If that's never happened before, you can't do that. So you can bring up the boundary and then enforce it the next day or the later on that day, but you can't bring it up and then enforce it at the same time if you're going to be effective. Can you do it? Yeah, absolutely. But this is a talk about what's effective. Um, that means that you can't really expect to set boundaries when you're angry, frustrated, guilty, tired. Those boundaries will be about your emotions, not about their screens. So you're going to do your best when you set your boundaries when you're in a state of like just being a loving parent. You're not trying to get compliance. You're trying to get cooperation. Um, when you have different boundaries between different caregivers, um, that's something you'll need to address with your kids. So if they go to dad's house on the weekend and dad lets them play like unlimited game times, like you need to have a conversation with them about like why that might not be a great idea, and also accept that like you can't really control that. But as a parent, that doesn't mean that you need to overcompensate for it. So one of the pitfalls of parenting, and I'll just use the two-parent family as an example, but you may have other examples that are similar. Grandma and grandpa, or they go to dad's house and it's unlimited gaming. That doesn't mean when they come back to your house that it's like you need to say, well, you only get like 6 minutes of this week because I know you played for 3 hours of dad's. That's not how it works. Like you have to be really kind of clear on yours. Now, ideally, we'll get them to a place where they can understand their own boundaries and what they need. Um, I want to give a little bit of guidance for younger kids, and then we'll talk about neurodiversity, and then we'll wrap up. So remember with younger guys, and by younger, I mean like 12 and under, you're giving the internet access to your child. You're not giving your child access to the internet. You're giving the whole internet access to your child. That's a really important understanding when your 12-year-old doesn't understand what's on the internet. If anybody, and I know no one in this chat has ever been to an adult website, but if anybody ever does, there's a sign that says, "Are you old enough to enter?" And you have to click yes, and then the whole world pops up. And I've talked to more kids in the past couple of years that have just they don't know what they saw and they can't unsee that and they don't know how to think about it. So it's like a curious thing, but then they go and then they look and they're like, "Oh my God, I don't know what's going on. It's just way too much." So safety is a concern for the younger guys. Attention spans, we talked about this earlier. Long form content is going to be way more useful for your kids than short form content. So as a parent, to the extent that you can try to promote long form content, go for it. A 2-hour movie, fine. 2 hours scrolling through videos, not fine. Same thing with like I put for impulse control. They can choose, maybe 4 videos when they're bored, but once they select a show, they need to stick to it or they got to put it away. One thing we're learning from devices is that their social skills are really atrophied as well, just like executive functioning skills. The good news is video games don't lead to more violence. That's been well researched. They can play the meanest games they want. They're not going to be more violent. But the more exposure they have to a screen and the earlier they have access to a screen, the more mental health problems they have over time. And the range of mental health problems is not specific. It's just any mental health problem and early access to a screen, the correlation is positive, meaning like it goes up on the graph like that. And that's really because they're not developing the social skills. When they're on screens, they're not developing. And like social skills are what keep us sane. Talking to other people and changing our minds and being flexible emotionally is what keeps us sane. Kids aren't doing that when they're on screen, so they're not learning how to stay sane. You can start really young with kids by teaching them insight. One of the games that I don't know how to put this. As a parent, you can play a game with your kid over the course of 9 days. As an example, you might say here's the game we're going to play. The first 3 days, you could kind of do unlimited screen time as much as you want, as long as you get your other responsibilities done. I just have to be able to ask you every now and then how much you like it, and you come up with a rating system like 1 to 10. And then for 3 days, I've got plans for us to do stuff. And you've planned like a trip to the rock climbing wall or a hike, or you're going to take them out on a boat, like canoeing or something like, not doesn't have to be expensive, but like you do really fun stuff, or you have friends over, or you plan a pizza gathering with a couple friends from school, like just stuff that you could probably easily organize. You do that for 3 days. And then you also ask them, how much fun are you having? How much fun are you having? How much fun are you having? And then go back to the next 3 days and let them game again. And when you game, ask them the same questions. How much fun are you having? How much fun are you having? And what you'll see is over those first 3 days, day 1, it'll be amazing. Day 2, it'll be kind of fun. Day 3, it'll be pretty boring. And then with their friends and social stuff, it'll be awesome, awesome, awesome. And then day 7, kids will go back to gaming and they'll say, "This is the best thing ever. I love it. It's so amazing." And that's actually really helpful as a parent, because what you can point out is like, hey, less is more. Like when you take a break, you have more fun. Do you notice what happened when you had 3 days in a row? It kind of sucked. And then you took a break and then it was really fun. And you can even do this over the course of like one day. If your kids are home on a rainy day, you can say like, watch all the videos you want, tell me how exciting it is. By the end, when you're done, they'll say they're exhausted and bored and they're not fun anymore. Give them a break for a while and like do something interesting and then go back to it and they'll say it's more exciting. And you can really make the case through your own experience. You don't have to tell them this, but you can do the experiment where they can learn that like eating ice cream all day long makes ice cream kind of suck. But if I have it like once a month, I kind of like ice cream. I love ice cream. And hopefully you understand there's a metaphor there. So developing insight, you've watched one episode. How much fun was that to watch? Stuff like that. You can have those conversations with those kids. Hey, it looks to me like you're not really having a lot of fun at all. You're just kind of like sitting on your phone, like doing this. You kind of look like a zombie. Is that fun for you? It doesn't really look fun. Like you said you like to have fun. That doesn't really look fun. And then they might be able to say like, no, it's not really fun. There's nothing else to do. Like, that's okay. But you're trying to bring up the point that, if they say to you, gaming's awesome all the time, they don't have a lot of insight. They don't really understand. So you can also talk about total screen time use as well. So just not instead of just the time gaming or time watching. A better conversation is instead of like kids will say like, well, how much screen time counts if I'm gaming or how much with YouTube or how much it's like, let's just look like 3 hours a week is probably enough for you. Or what I'm making that number up. Don't run away and say I said 3 hours a week. It's really different depending on the kids. People ask about ADHD and autism. There's a lot more gaming in those places. It seems to be, here's the big takeaways. In ADHD, gaming is a lot more engaging and it worsens symptoms over time. So that's just sort of it's the short end of a lot of research. With autism, what's really great about autism and gaming is that people with autism love clear rules. They can hyper focus. They have very rigid thinking, and games are very rigid and they have clear rules. There's really clear boundaries. And so parents need to use really concrete language with kids with autism and setting boundaries like, hey, if you don't share, kids won't like you. If kids don't like you, they won't play games with you. Do you want kids to play games with you? Like these really clear conversations with kids with autism. They're just going to be a little bit more drawn to the games, but that's not impossible for you to understand. It's just when you have your conversation and they bring up like, I'm so good at it. I want to be an esports player. Like you can validate that and say you are really good at it. And then you can understand how it worsens it over time. And then I think with giftedness, gaming becomes an issue too, especially with kids that want to be high achievers. Usually with giftedness, they're really good in like one area and they don't really, I don't know how to put this, they don't really transfer the hard work into other areas. So the other areas just kind of like seem pretty boring to them. So when they're really crushing it on a game, like it's important to just acknowledge their need for achievement. That they're hearing all the time high achievement matters and they're high achieving. And then the last part is when do we need to see a professional about this? Is there benefit to seeing a therapist? Could a therapist help you? It's not just about treatment. So here are some reasons to get help. Maybe your kid doesn't understand that there's an issue. They don't have any insight. Maybe you can't have this conversation because it's been nothing but World War III ever since you started bringing it up. Things feel totally out of control. Game devices are getting broken. Things are getting stolen. There's tantrums or ADHD is in the mix, or they have really low self-esteem and they say they're going to jump off the window if you take their games. Sometimes professionals like, I'm not really emotionally engaged in the conversation. So I'm able to like have a more distant emotion with the kid and we can talk reasonably. And then you can get some help and support and a professional might be able to help you facilitate a conversation. They might help your child have some more insight about what's going on. They might help with perspective taking. They might have your child come up with their own solutions. I can just say from my own personal experience, how many children, teens, I've said like, so gaming, is it like under control or not under control? I feel like I always get honest answers. And I say that because a lot of times it's totally out of control. Just last week, parents blocked anything streaming on a kid's device. They did it, in a rage and said, how's the relationship? How did that affect you? Like, do you think it's reasonable or not? And he was like, honestly, I'm doing way too much streaming. It's exam season. So like, it's fair. They didn't have to do it that way, but it's fair. But that's not a conversation he would ever admit to a parent. So it can be really helpful to get professional help. And that being said, here's an access for professional help. And I'll stop there and we'll take some questions. I don't know if questions came up in the slide or in the, sorry, in the Zoom. I need to stop sharing.
Share your screen, I can use that.
Okay, share my screen, right? No.